Before we dive into the hottest news topics, if you love Flash Drive, make sure you're following us on Spotify and Apple to get across when any new content drops.
We must demand immediate negotiation of a peaceful end to the war in Ukraine, or we will end up in World War III and there will never be a war like this.
As a resurgent Ukraine retakes territory from Russia, anxiety is rising that the Russian president may do the unthinkable. Is Vladimir Putin mad enough to use his nuclear arsenal? Plus,
I am offering this resolution that the committee direct the chairman to issue a subpoena for relevant documents and testimony under oath from Donald John Trump in connection with the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol.
Trump under pressure from many sides, as never before seen footage sheds new light on the shocking January 6th attack. And
why I wrote White Lives Matter on a shirt is because they do. It's the obvious thing.
controversy merchant Kanye West back at it. We unpack the latest scandals surrounding the polarising star. I'm James Law and this is Flash Drive. Welcome back, Liz Burke, Deputy Editor from news.com.au. Thanks for coming back.
Good to be here.
Now tell me, Liz, what have people been getting into on news.com.au this week?
Well, the story that's dominating is the trial for the man accused of raping Brittany Higgins in Parliament House. That was expected to run for 4 to 6. So a lot of people were saying up to 7 weeks, but we've just started the 3rd week of the trial and it looks like it's going to be wrapped up any day now. Mm-hmm. So there'll be a decision to be made by the jury and we could have a verdict in a matter of days, perhaps even by the time you listen to this podcast.
Very interesting. And why do you think there's been such interest in this? I guess it's been a story that's been around for, 2 years now nearly?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's been a highly publicised story since the beginning, since news.com.au broke the story and had those interviews with Miss Higgins. But I think also we don't usually see rape trials or many sort of criminal trials played out in this much detail. We don't really have there's not the media coverage and the scrutiny of all of the witnesses, all of the evidence and the cross-examination. So I think perhaps, as well as the story itself, I think the fact that we're kind of seeing this really intense process play out very much in real time is capturing a lot of people's attention.
Sure is. Okay, we'll keep an eye on news.com.au for all the breaking news on that case. Like we say, there should be a verdict imminently. But we will start by heading overseas, where anxiety is rising that Vladimir Putin may do the unthinkable and use nuclear weapons against Ukraine. So as we've discussed in recent podcasts, Ukraine has mounted quite an incredible fight back against the Russians. They've driven Russians back over the border. They've reclaimed scores of towns and cities that were claimed at the start of the invasion. And the resurgence was typified by this explosion this month on the Kerch Bridge, which is an important strategic link between Crimea and Russia. Oh, and the detonation happened to align with Putin's 70th birthday. Coincidence?
I mean, how else would you want to celebrate?
Well, exactly. One of the best things was some Ukrainian put together a video of the explosion with Marilyn Monroe singing "Happy Birthday, Mr. President" next to it. So I won't sing it for you, but you get the picture.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
So yes, I mean, to get serious, there was a pretty serious retaliation to that explosion.
Of course.
Russia launched hundreds of deadly airstrikes on Ukrainian cities, including hitting the capital, Kyiv, for the first time in months. Now, as the war drags on, Putin is been increasingly embarrassed on the world stage, and experts say it's grown more likely that he may resort to deploying his nuclear arsenal to sway the conflict in his favour. Here's what some experts had to say.
Russia's forces are exhausted. The use of prisoners as reinforcements and now the mobilisation of tens of thousands of inexperienced conscripts speaks of a really desperate situation.
I think it's that could potentially lead Putin to something like the use of a nuclear weapon in order to show those who are actually in support of Russia's war that he is doing something and that Russia still does have some kind of power left
Liz, it's a big question, but what do you think? Do you think Putin would be mad enough to use the nukes against Ukraine?
I mean, he kind of keeps hinting that he would be, doesn't he? It was only a few weeks ago when he made that speech that he was, kind of trying to be really clear and make it clear that the threat was genuine, saying, this is not a joke. This is not just a threat. We're really serious about it. But I don't know about this theory that he would deploy that kind of destruction simply to show power. I mean, obviously, yes, that's kind of the point of it. I mean, we know that he's threatened to do this enough times. We're pretty sure he has the capability. But I mean, yeah, he is, a dictator. He's probably doesn't have the same kind of sensibilities as maybe you or I would in deploying such a decision. Mm-hmm. But yeah, even so, I feel like it's such an extraordinary move. I mean, if there was any time to do it, it would be, now-ish or in the near future, whereas these experts are saying, he's kind of running low on options. But I don't know. It's a lot. It's a big call to make.
It's a hard thing to come back from, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. And look, I think I tend to agree with you that it's probably unlikely.
Yeah.
Because if he did use them, the kind of blowback from NATO and even potentially from the US would be pretty extreme.
Yeah, well, what do you think? How do you think that would play out? What would the world reaction be?
Well, a lot of the sort of NATO leaders, so that's the military alliance, a lot of them have been saying that they will defend Ukraine pretty strongly, and the US has said the same stuff. I think no one really is interested in putting boots on the ground in Ukraine, but really, it's possible that the Ukraine's allies wouldn't need to nuke Russia in response. Instead, what they could do is really amass kind of like their massive firepower and do things from the air and just eliminate all kinds of Russian targets and that sort of stuff, and really come down hard on them and obliterate them in a way that doesn't need to resort to nukes. I think that's probably the most likely thing that would happen. So it would put Russia in a pretty difficult position if they did so. And I think Putin knows that. Totally.
Well, at the moment, I mean, he's being embarrassed basically kind of just fighting against Ukraine. Whereas if he effectively starts a world war, which this would immediately trigger, I mean, I don't know how long he's going to last.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah, especially because what we've been learning in recent weeks is this real lack of morale in the Russian troops.
Yeah.
That's the thing that's probably most embarrassing. So we're hearing stories of people like they get trained for like a week. They don't know how to use their guns. They're not given proper military uniforms. They're not given proper food.
Yeah.
And we're hearing some quite funny stories of Russian soldiers kind of abandoning the cause. That one of the things that got me this week is there are reports out of Ukraine. So when they did the mobilization, so this was a couple of weeks ago, Russia was like, all right, we're calling up all army reservists. You might get a tap on the shoulder and have to go and fight.
Yeah.
And what they also did was, well, we're running short on people. What are we going to do? They went to the jails and got prisoners and they let them go if they would fight in Ukraine. And then they gave them guns. And then what they did is, there are reports that some of these soldiers have got their gun, then gone back to Russia and started committing crimes again.
Genius. What could go wrong?
That's pretty good, right?
Yeah. I mean, if you're gonna pull the trigger on this, you want to have a pretty strong army behind you, and it seems like that's one thing that he absolutely doesn't have and can't pretend to.
No. And there was sort of some other interesting concessions from Putin. I think it was at the weekend where he did another speech, and he said that it was almost like an acknowledgement that mobilization had failed.
Yeah.
And he said that we're going to stop that now because he didn't say it failed, but he said we're going to stop that now because we don't need it anymore. So he's kind of gone back on that. And he also said something like that wide-scale airstrikes like the ones they did after the bridge explosion wouldn't be necessary anymore too.
Yeah, right.
Which to me is that's a pretty remarkable concession from the Russian president,
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it seems like if you're kind of dialing back the airstrikes, is your next move really going to be to start a nuclear war?
So that gives me some hope, right?
Yeah, great news. Thanks,
Great
Putin.
news. So somehow we started with the nukes and we've ended with maybe he's getting a bit more sensible. That's good.
Anyway, appreciate the update.
There we go. Remember, Flash drivers, if you're loving the podcast, let us know. Subscribe and leave a review so everyone can get across the news of the week. Still overseas, Liz, the investigation into the US Capitol riot took a dramatic turn last week when the committee voted to subpoena former President Donald Trump. And the question is whether he'll hand over documents and testify under oath over what role he played in sparking the riot. Also last week, we were giving some shocking new insights into what happened behind closed doors on January 6th, as the committee played never-before-seen footage of Democrats Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer pleading with the White House and other authorities to quash the violence as it was unfolding around them. It was pretty dramatic stuff. For me, the most memorable grab to emerge, however, has to be this from Pelosi. So to set this up, this was the moment when the crowd was moving from the Trump speech over to the Capitol, and they were looking out the window and kind of seeing the mob rushing through. And this is what one of Nancy's aides said, and Pelosi's response was pretty memorable.
They have dissuaded him from coming to Capitol Hill. They told him they don't have the resources to protect him here. So at the moment, he is not coming, but that could change.
Oh, he comes, I'm going to punch him out. This is
Oh,
my
wow,
moment.
I would pay to see
I've
that.
been waiting for this, for trespassing on the Capitol grounds. I'm going to punch him out, and I'm going to go to jail, and I'm going to be happy.
Liz, you kind of can't blame Nancy for saying that, can you?
I love that for Pelosi. I feel like she's just been wanting to say this for so long.
Right.
I'm going to punch him out and I'm going to go to jail and I'm going to be happy. Brilliant. Perfect.
It was an iconic moment. Yeah. The January 6th committee has kind of wrapped up its proceedings, and at the very end, they dropped the bomb that they were subpoenaing Trump. I think there'll be quite a protracted legal battle to see whether that actually happens.
Yeah.
But for me, it's sort of like the latest in a lot of different wars that Trump is fighting at the moment. There's that one. He's got like some potential charges that he's facing over taxes.
Yep.
And then, of course, he's got the potential of being charged over the classified documents that he kept inside Mar-a-Lago in Florida. So it seems like, are the walls closing in on him?
Yeah. Does it seem that way to you? I know that you've been following this stuff really closely. I mean, this is a guy who, seems like he thinks in his mind that he's going to be president again in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
But is this finally going to be his undoing?
Well, I mean, there's a few different threads, as I say.
Yeah.
There's like a few different wars he's fighting. I think the January 6th is potentially, it's a bad look, but it's potentially the least damaging for him in the sense that this committee is largely Democrats, so it's largely the opposition who's running this, plus a few Republicans, but they are who Trump would term rhinos, Republicans in name only, or never Trumpers, you might say. So they're people who've got it out for him. So there isn't a lot of Republican backing behind this committee, which doesn't give it the same authority.
Yeah, so he can even use that as a narrative kind of to his advantage, really.
And in fact, he does.
Yeah.
He's got a very Trumpian way to dismiss the whole operation. It's called the Select Committee, and he calls it the Unselect Committee for that reason.
Genius.
Yeah, it's classic Trump zinger. But I feel like that one is, it's very interesting, and it's very sort of damning for him, because this new evidence, what it showed was that Pelosi, the other leading Democrats, and even the leading Republicans on this day, they were all in the same room, huddled together in a location close to the Capitol as the riots were happening, and they were quite sensibly, one would say quite calmly, on the phone to authorities, to the White House, pleading with them to do something about it, pleading with them to maybe get Trump to do something about it. And we know it took him hours to do so. So I think they come across looking quite good after all this.
Absolutely. And it gives you that insight as well that, I know that we've seen the footage of the crowds and, people jumping over fences and destroying things. But I think to see those people's reaction and, they're clearly under so much pressure, but as you said, handling it quite sensibly and quite calmly, the urgency still comes through and like the seriousness of the situation. And I feel like that kind of more than anything really gave me an idea of like, wow, this was a really, really terrifying moment, really dangerous to a lot of people. And you just see, the greatest authority in the land, the president of the White House, doing absolutely nothing about it. I feel like that's really damning of Trump. But I mean, of course, his supporters or potential supporters wouldn't see it that way. So what does it matter?
Yeah, exactly. And there's been a long-standing kind of effort to minimise the importance of this day on the Republican side, and then for the Democrats to make huge hay out of it. One of the other things that struck with me from the footage that came out was, I can't remember if it was Pelosi or Schumer, but I think it was Pelosi pleading and with the National Guard and going, imagine if this was happening at the Pentagon or the White House, how you would react. Yeah. It was almost like no one was quite sure which authority should swoop in and stamp it out, which is pretty scary because they were literally baying for blood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It seems like the kind of situation that there should be a bit of a game plan for. But I guess before this moment actually happened, you kind of didn't assume that it was ever going to happen.
Well, I'm sure they've got pretty good plans in place now, but it remains so shocking when you look at it about like what in America, it's just like blows your mind.
Yes, and I think whenever a really detailed inquiry like this plays out, you kind of lose the overall impact of the detail. But some of this stuff that's come out this week has kind of really brought it back for me and going, whoa, this is huge. This is bad.
Trump is fighting a lot of different battles, but the thing about Trump is he's really Mr. Teflon.
Always.
Like, think of some of the scandals he has endured in the past. Like, I think grab him on the pussy is one of the ones. That happened a few days out from the election.
Famously.
He was just fine. And a lot of these things will come down to lawyers and whether things can get through the courts and so you don't think he'd be too fussed around the timings, around the midterms? Well, I think the thing about the way that Americans think about Trump is that, his fans are locked in and his detractors are locked in. I don't know that there's too many people who are swaying one way or the other. And, on Flash, when you've got sort of different news outlets looking at these things from different perspectives, right? So we've got CNN, and like CNN's had some of the most, had some exclusive footage, and they were saying, this is a historic day, this is huge. And then you look at Fox News, which comes more from the right, and they're sort of saying, this is it's a classic American term, they say it's a nothing burger. Yeah. It's a nothing burger. And it's like stuff we already knew, and it's from this committee that is really just there to get at Trump. Yeah. Nothing new here, let's move on. So, and also, some on the right argued that this was timed to drop on a day when there was really bad economic news for the US. Right. Really bad inflation, which is bad for Biden, that it's kind of pushed it off the front of the agenda. Yeah. I don't know if I agree with that, but that's sort of their perspective on it. Yeah. So, yeah, I don't know that it changes a lot of minds is the thing. So that might be just the thing that saves Trump. He always has seemed to operate totally separately to the political system, even though he's part of it, used to be the head of it. It's like he's this entirely different entity. And, what happens in pre-election stuff, in midterms, in voting, in the actual system of the American government, it doesn't seem to matter, no matter how involved or otherwise he is. Indeed. It's quite extraordinary. Yeah, and he doesn't mind a fight. Yeah. He does not mind being in the corner. He'll punch his way out. So, I wouldn't be surprised if he comes out of all this too. Yeah. Unless Pelosi gets at him. Well, that's true. Yeah, well, he used to be a boxing promoter, so maybe he could tee that up himself. I would watch. We'll see. Love hearing us analyse the biggest and smallest headlines each week. Make sure you follow us on the socials so you don't miss any content. We're on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube. Get on it. Liz, let's talk yay. So, Kanye West, he's back in the headlines for all the wrong reasons after a string of controversial public pronouncements in recent weeks. He sort of mostly came to prominence again when he caused outrage at Paris Fashion Week when he wore a White Lives Matter t-shirt. And then after that came this, I'm editorializing here, borderline incoherent interview with Tucker Carlson on Fox News. Have a listen.
So you made reference to the White Lives Matter t-shirt, which you brought out at Paris Fashion Week.
Yeah.
Why did you do that, and what did it mean?
You know, I do certain things from a feeling. I just channel the energy. It just feels right. It's using a gut instinct, a connection with God, and just brilliance. You know, like as if you asked like Tanya Harding how she did the triple flip or the triple spin. She was in so much practice that when it was time for her to skate in a competitive format, it just happened. Like it happened outside of practice. It happened in the real format, and that's what's happening. Is God is like preparing us for the real battles, and we are in a battle with the media. Like the majority of the media has a godless agenda.
I mean, I probably have a godless agenda. Do you?
Well, I don't think the media is supposed to have a godful agenda or any sort of agenda, really. I mean, that's kind of part of it. Oh man, it's yeah. I mean, you said borderline incoherent, but just putting those words together just absolutely doesn't make sense. This fashion show was extraordinarily controversial, and that was the intention behind it. But it kind of seemed like just another thing that he does, like just another one of his tweets or another one of his Instagram posts. It was even sort of pulled together with the same amount of thought that you would imagine goes into those rants that he does, because it wasn't scheduled. It seems like this show was pulled together in like 72 hours, and he was sort of making excuses for why it wasn't so finessed and everything. I'm like, well, yeah, is that because you just kind of pulled it out of your ass in a couple of days and didn't really put that much thought behind it? So yeah, those White Lives Matter t-shirts were clearly meant to shock. And they did, but I think what he kind of wanted it to be something so much more than it is, because you know there is art in appropriating certain messages and communicating them a different way and applying a different meaning. But I don't think that's what he was doing here. He was just putting like a really quite offensive slogan on a t-shirt and sending models out wearing it and wearing it himself. Like, what? That's not clever. Right. That's just, it's just, I don't know. It's just really silly and really disappointing.
Well, he said in this interview with Tucker Carlson that it shouldn't, well, I mean, I'm paraphrasing him, but essentially his point was that shouldn't be a controversial message. Yeah. All lives matter. Yeah. Why can't you say that white lives matter? Does he have a point?
I mean, like, it's a very... yes, it's a point, but it's not a new point. It's not a clever point. It's something that, you know, the other side of the argument to what you... Like, he has in the past demonstrated to be on. That's what they say. And he says, you know, like, of course, white lives matter. That's the problem. That's the obvious message. But it's just, yeah, it doesn't seem like a clever thing to say. It's, it is controversial. I mean, he's trying to say that it shouldn't be controversial, but yet he's doing it explicitly to be controversial. Doesn't really make a lot of sense. Doesn't seem like a powerful argument to me. I just feel like, I don't know, and even looking at it like as a, as a fashion show, you know, like we've had shocking slogans. We've had, you know, t-shirts that look like that are meant to upset and offend and create controversy. Like, it's just, if you want, he kind of wants to be known as this brilliant artist that, you know, crosses so many art forms. And I feel like he just didn't, like, it's not clever enough. It's just upsetting to a lot of people.
Yeah. Yeah, we certainly got a lot of noses out of joint, but then it got worse.
Yeah, it got a lot worse.
Got a lot worse. So a couple of days later, he got himself kicked off social media, I think for a short time, when he published this tweet. I'm just going to read it out. This is the quote. I'm a bit sleepy tonight, but when I wake up, I'm going to go DEFCON 3 on Jewish people. The funny thing is, I can't actually be anti-Semitic because black people are actually Jew also. You guys have toyed with me and tried to blackball anyone who ever opposes your agenda. Now, there was a pretty rapid, cranky response to that.
Big response.
And yeah, he was quite rightly kicked off social media immediately. What's going on here, Liz? What's he doing?
Like, I don't think this, the message of this is actually worth getting into because it's just
abhorrent,
offensive and silly. But he's kind of trying to do the same thing. He's trying to, recontextualize something that is offensive, and by saying, I can't be anti-Semitic, when he's just making anti-Semitic comments. Like, there's no excuse for this, and this isn't even dressed up as art or anything like that. It's just really silly. I've noticed, I consider myself, I guess, a Kanye West fan. I'm a fan of his music, absolutely. Yep. And so on social media, particularly on Instagram, I follow quite a few, associated accounts, like fan accounts that, that analyze his music or, share different photos and things. And I've noticed in this past week, a lot of those have just shut down and said, like, I can't be associated with this person anymore. Like, I, should have pulled the pin on this, like, at an earlier stage when he started making other offensive comments. So I feel like he's really, really losing a lot of people here. But, I mean, we don't really know what's going on behind the scenes. We know that this is a guy who has a lot of personal issues and a lot of mental issues. And yeah, I mean, it's just, it's quite upsetting to see it, to see that play out so publicly. But yeah, and it's quite upsetting as, as a fan of someone's music. Like, I never want to get into that debate of, like, can you separate the art from the artist? Like, I don't want any of this from him. Yeah. I kind of just want the music.
I know exactly what you mean because, like, I like his music too.
Yeah.
Well, but increasingly less so, right? I used to be a big fan of his, and there seemed to be a link between him saying and doing crazier and crazier things in public and his music starting to suck.
Yeah, and there's some of those messages that creep in there as well. So he's, had some music recently and, like, music videos that was, specifically kind of making fun of Pete Davidson and things like that.
Lame.
I know. And then he puts in, some, like, controversial little comments in other songs, and it's just sad as a fan.
Yeah, and like really Kanye would hate me for saying this, but I'm only interested in his music.
Same.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm not interested in his fashion, his shoes, his politics career.
Yeah.
I just want him to be the kick-ass musician that he used to be.
Yeah.
But increasingly his music has felt unfinished. It feels, and he talks it up like this is going to be a game-changing album, and, like, Donda was just a bit like...
See, I love Donda.
Do you?
I love it.
But don't you think it's so, like, it needs to be edited and, like, fixed up and finished? And,
I don't think it's that good, but I just really like it. And I want more, and I want more. I want to hear more from him, but I don't want the publicity around it. I don't want the live performances. Like, I kind of just want some nice songs.
You don't want his tilted stage.
I don't want his tilted stage, no. Great line, Taylor.
Well, look, to draw Taylor into this.
Yeah, she loves that.
Yeah, she loves
just
that.
being included in more narratives, please.
Well, I wanted to show you this quote from her producer, Jack Antonoff. So he commented after the tweet came out, and I kind of agree with him. Here he is.
See, when Bowie went through the fascism phase, right? It's dicey shit, but the motherfucker's making some of the best records that have ever happened. Kanye's so far from good work. It's just, what do we do besides just tell him to get the fuck out of here?
I mean, he does have a good point. Like, I'll reluctantly or embarrassedly admit that I love his last album, but I'm not coming out and saying it's anywhere near one of the best records ever made. Absolutely not.
I think he went on to, like, compare Kanye to like that crazy guy on the street just yelling at you. It's like, why should I listen to him?
I know. That's who he is. And I don't want him to be that guy. Yeah.
But, you know, like at the end of the day, aren't these artists meant to be provocateurs?
Yeah.
Aren't they meant to challenge us and kind of, I mean, we don't want them to be hateful, but like, you know, shouldn't they be challenging?
They should be challenging, but I think they should also be doing it in a clever way. I mean, it's not enough just to be a provocateur. If you're being an artist who is a provocateur, then the art kind of has to match that. And I don't think it's there for him.
Well, you know, like we've spoken about Trump, we've spoken about Kanye, both potential presidential candidates.
Oh my God.
Next year, 2024. So let's see.
Great. So much to look forward to.
That'll be a great debate.
Oh my God. So this is the part of the show where we like to give a shout out to our favorite streaming service, Flash. James Law, what should we be watching?
Yeah, well, we talked about this on a couple of podcasts ago where I interviewed Erin Molan. So she's obviously a radio star, sports journalist, and also a Sky News host. Her new documentary, Haters Online, Erin Molan Fights Back. By the time the podcast airs, will have aired, and you can catch up with it on demand on Flash. It's a really, really well-made documentary. Erin has sort of dug into her experiences of copping some really heinous trolling online, and also looked into some other cases from overseas of some really bad stuff, such as a murder that was pretty much organised over social media.
Wow.
And just the way that, you know, the internet has just been allowed to become such a toxic place, and what Australia and what else we can do to try and sort of win back online safety. So I'd recommend you give that a watch on Flash.
Yeah, sounds intense.
Yeah, it is, especially in the beginning. So the opening of the documentary is Erin staring down the barrel and opening up her Twitter account for the first time in years and seeing the comments, and she just bursts into tears.
Wow, because she did cop it, especially being, was she on the footy show, I think?
That's right. Yeah, so it's really when she was, you know, a female first panellist and then host of the footy show. Just there were so many people not willing to accept that. And how did they deal with it? They just ripped her to shreds online and even like said hateful things about her daughter and stuff like that. So, you know, this is something she's been campaigning on for many years and feels about it very passionately. And I think it's a pretty important issue as we more and more live our lives online. Yeah. So
good on her. We'll give it a watch.
All right, Liz, we've come to the end. Thanks for all your thoughts on the big issues. We'll be back next week to do it all again.
Nice one. See you then.
Catch ya.